You could do just like a tiny bit of postmortem. Chief. I'm just kidding.
All right, Patrick Klepek, let's talk about True Detective Night Country, Episode 3. I'm going to read the plot summary. While Hank leads the search for Clark, Pryor asks Danvers about the murder-suicide case that drove a wedge between her and Navarro. And Navarro and Danvers seek out a local hairdresser for insight on Annie. Patrick Klepek, overall thoughts on the episode?
Strong. I found myself, still really interested in this world. I'm glad that, I'd mentioned, I think on the previous episode, that I was hoping we'd get these two characters in a blender faster, like pretty fast. And I think the dynamic these two main characters share is really interesting. I think there's a pretty compelling mystery about their past that the way this particular episode is edited makes me very fascinated to find out what ultimately is, what's the wedge that is like led to this sort of emotional gap between the two of them. And, I'm not shocked at some of the polarizing response to where this show is going in terms of its horror elements. I am surprised how explicit it is being about them. It is not a show that is tiptoeing about potentially explicitly supernatural between, oranges being thrown, between characters speaking in very spooky ways. At this point, I would be shocked if this show wasn't explicitly supernatural. I might go as far to say disappointed if it wasn't explicitly supernatural, because I don't know how you turn around and explain this in a grounded and scientific way. And but yeah, I continue to really like the world, the characters. Obviously, as a horror buff, I'm here for the show taking the door that wasn't opened in True Detective season 1 and saying it was inside the other one. But yeah, I'm still very invested, very interested, and all the characters are kind of working for me, and all the setups that were leaving for the episodes to come.
Yeah. Let's talk about a few things that actually happened in the episode, and specifically this supernatural idea. I'm going to say the show is leaving itself a bunch of outs when it comes to supernatural stuff. Like, I had the same reaction as you did, which is, oh, wow, the show is really explicitly supernatural now, right? Like, specifically, I think the character of Lund is the one that's in the hospital.
Yeah.
And there's this incredible sequence where he sits up and starts, talking to Navarro and talking about her mom and all this stuff. It's like stuff that only Navarro would know, and, and then kind of passes out again. Like, what's going on there? Navarro also has a bunch of visions this episode,
and Navarro is more or less suffering from a concussion, most likely. So I think that is the out that the show is giving itself in terms of, is she reliable in there? Like, the sequences that are explicitly supernatural, exactly. There are no outside observers for what occurs, and so
and
the show
it's mostly Navarro as far as I can tell. Other than like Fiona Shaw from like other than
who's
Travis
just like,
Cole,
I walk with ghosts,
right?
Right. So you're right.
So we also know that the town is being poisoned to some degree. Really, as with all things, it all comes down to the evils of capitalism, Patrick Klepek. The mine is helping to employ half the town, according to Danvers' character, but also like potentially poisoning them. There's a character who has like a stillborn child this episode, presumably because of poisoning from the mine. And so it's like, oh, the mine is actually potentially poisoning people, polluting people. Maybe like that's what's causing people's aggression. Maybe that's what's causing people's hallucinations. So I think there's a lot of plausible deniability when it comes to the supernatural stuff, because like the True Detective season 1 hinted at it had people believing supernatural things, but there was nothing explicitly supernatural in True Detective.
This is way more heavy-handed, though.
Right, absolutely.
I think you're right. I think, is there a path the show can navigate that allows it to have its cake and eat it too, which is, look, like, wouldn't it be fun if we got to have something that was more like explicitly a horror, got to play into those tropes and like gets to be more outwardly scary, but ultimately has a convenient explanation for X, Y, and Z. I think you're right. I think that might be a difficult path to go down. I think that potentially leads to. I mean, I guess the supernatural path is also not an easy one as well, because there can be a lot of fuzziness there. So if I had to guess, it probably is more akin to what you're gesturing at. I think it is more likely to be.
But you want that supernatural.
I want a fucking monster in episode 6, David.
Yeah.
Like when she says, "I found it," I want that to be some sort of hairy, ancient Cthulhu beast buried in the ice. Do I think it's more likely that there's systemic poisoning going on and Navarro had a concussion? Yeah, probably that probably makes more sense in the world of the show. But look, a boy can dream.
A couple of other things to point out that happened this episode. We learned that Hank, I think that's the John Hawkes character, right? He had apparently not turned over critical information about the murder of that woman who we meet earlier in the episode. We see that Navarro and her had a very meaningful confrontation where she was delivering this child. And
I thought it was an incredible sequence. That was
incredible
a great opener. Yeah.
Where we understand why Navarro might have gotten so invested in this woman's life. And then Hank says, Hank was not only hiding the evidence from that, but didn't acknowledge a critical piece of information that could have helped to crack the whole thing wide open. And Navarro gets really pissed at that. And then they have this big confrontation at the ice rink where, Hank accuses Danvers hey, you're playing Mrs. Robinson to my kid. There's been articles, Patrick Klepek, I sent you one published of what does that what's that Mrs. Robinson reference mean in True Detective season 4, episode 3?
Yeah.
And right around the time when that article was published, David Chen, started desiccating and withering away and just blowing into the wind. I don't know if you noticed that happen.
No, I mean, I get it. I mean, especially in the media cycle that we're in these days, where what are people possibly going to Google? I get where we end up with that article, but you're right that it does, between us talking about Jon Stewart post 9/11 and then what is a Miss Robinson reference? Wow, we're just reckoning with our mortality here, David.
Indeed. For those who don't know, I guess it is pretty old now, Patrick Klepek, but it is a reference to the 1967 film The Graduate, which is at this point almost 60 years old.
Yeah, so I feel like once we're 60, you can understand why someone might not understand the reference.
But wow, that's painful to contemplate. Anyway,
the way she throws the coffee in his face was tremendous. I rewound that a couple of times.
Wow.
It was very satisfying.
Well, his reaction too, he doesn't react in anger. He just kind of sits there and takes it,
Yeah.
So, couple of other things to point out. First of all, I found it interesting that Max, the one to watch for HBO, can't even win the streaming war on its own TV show. And good on them. Good on them. That's more believable that Navarro would say, "I watch Netflix," when I'm alone by myself. How weird would it be if Navarro was like, "I watch Max, the one to watch for HBO," a statement that no one in the history of the planet has ever said.
Because you also know Netflix wouldn't allow the opposite to occur, right? I can't, you know what I mean? The heavy hand of Netflix, I think, would become a studio note. I do think it is.
I watch my favorite streaming network is Max. I think that's existed for 12 months. Anyway, there is this subplot with his hairdresser who was involved with this guy who they end up tracking down, but then the guy didn't even know about the people dying. So that, I think that was just a dead end, right? That's just not going to lead anywhere, from my understanding.
I don't know. And the way he responds to the deaths makes me think, not that he knows something, but the surprise at which, everyone could have died out there. I don't know. And especially because the kind of encampment that she comes to is such a unique setup. It's always kind of interesting every time we go to a new part of this world, because it obviously makes sense. There'd almost be different kind of social setups, of how you would fit in this very distinct part of the environment. And like the one that they have is like so wholly unique than like the more traditional kind of town setup that we see Danvers and Navarro in. So I don't know. I'm not sure if it's explicitly a dead end, but I suppose I wouldn't be shocked either. I also thought it was, obviously Danvers is this very cold, mean, some might call a bitch, as all the characters seem to think about her. And yet, like, the show is very careful. Every time a child is present, she softens immediately. And it's not an act. It is like, she is good with kids. She, like, the sequence she has where she is able to convince the hairdresser's child to come over and have some mac and cheese. She's got a story about this unicorn. Like, she's very gentle. And she is so mean everywhere else that I don't think it's an act. I think we're seeing a different version of herself that is hidden underneath all of this other stuff. And she's so unbelievably mean to her own child. Like, like the way that, like, she forces her to take off the makeup, like, on her face. I have to assume we're going somewhere with that, because the show has done it 2 or 3 times now with the presence of a small child. She turns into putty almost immediately.
Yeah, I think the show is in large part about the relationship between mothers and daughters, right? Yeah. And how pain and trauma is or is not passed on, about how heritage is or is not passed on. There's a scene where Navarro says she regrets that her mother didn't tell her Inupiaq name. And meanwhile, we have Danvers, who is like trying to rub this, tattoo off her daughter's face. I saw a really good explanation of that, of how like Danvers is forced to look at dead Indigenous women a lot in the course of her job. And like it consumes a lot of her life. And so maybe like the resemblance of her daughter to that is too much for her to take.
And that was my interpretation. Yeah. Like, do you see what the fuck is going on here? Like, do you see how many?
Not the right way to handle it. Like, not the right way for Danvers to handle it.
No.
But it's but at least it's like, it's not just Danvers is an asshole. Like, it's not just Danvers is an asshole. She is an asshole, but there's like some pain and protection.
But she can't explain it. Like, she can't meet her child
communicate.
On her level.
You're supposed to be able to communicate some of that instead of just like acting out, which is what Danvers does.
Right.
But I agree. It's nice to see that she's a complicated figure and there's like many sides to her. So, anything else about the episode? I guess, we learned that the people who in the corpsicle likely didn't die from freezing to death. So that's like a new thing. That's a new thing that they're probably killed before and then froze. And then, the guy who survived Lund wakes up and says, like, we woke her. She's out there. So, like, what is he talking about? We'll find out.
Well, there's also the cell phone footage that they recovers. Like,
about waking up her and Annie, like, wake. So all there's some her that was awakened. And you know what, Patrick Klepek, the opening scene of the show of all the wildlife like fleeing and stuff, it does imply that I think there is going to be like a more explicitly supernatural element to this show. So we'll see. I think you might get your wish yet. So
I did really, one of my favorite exchanges in the entire episode was when the younger cop employs his veterinary friend to come out, and he's the one that sort of speculates that they were actually they might have died of fear. But they don't have actual forensics to come and do like an analysis. And there's a bit where Danvers goes like, and like, you definitely shouldn't do like, we probably shouldn't do like a quick it'd be like really illegal. In a lot of shows, that's when the guy would be like, well, I guess I could do that real quick.
Right.
And instead, like, the young cop was like, no, like, get out of here. Do not do that.
Yeah. She's like, yeah, you definitely can't do a postmortem. That would be illegal. Definitely don't do that. Right. I just wanted to see what your reaction, that's what I think. I mean, if you think it's okay, then we can continue that conversation.
Every time I confess to a new crime from my past, I'm just trying to see if David would think, like, would that be interesting to do now? Like, how do you feel about it, David? You want to defraud Costco again? How we feeling?
So the people, the guy Lund says, we woke her, she's out there. Annie at the end says, I found it, right? So like there's some force, some creature, something out there that is potentially animating all these people and threatening them. So I anticipate I hope we'll have some kind of answers around that before the season is over. Anything else to mention? Oh, the guy, I don't think they ever found the guy that they were looking for, right? Clark, right? They went out and like looked for him. They never found that guy, but it does make sense that he would be the main suspect, given that all of his friends are dead and he's MIA, right? So I understand why they would try to look for him. But yeah, Hank assembles this like ragtag group of people and is unable to find him yet. We'll see what happens in the next episode. Any other thoughts, Patrick Klepek?
No, I am again. I think I'm invested in the story and the characters, and maybe this will end up being to the show's fault. Is I'm now deeply invested in finding out whether it's tricking me or not. Like what is going on here with the supernatural stuff. And so, I've certainly seen some of the commentary around the show as people being maybe a little distracted by that, and I think the show is being intentionally distracting about that. And I think it'll be a fine line for it to walk to make that feel satisfying, whatever path it chooses to do. And so that is one of those kind of like higher level storytelling decisions that I am really interested to see where the show lands, because it has to make some hard choices one way or the other because of how it's presented itself to this point.
Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.